Our fourth session would be held by Sam Gregory, who is an award-winning human rights activist. He's the executive director of Witness, where they basically enable activists to use cameras and video technology to document all kinds of active events that require the public eye. He's himself a smartphone witness. He's been an authority on deep fakes and how to combat them. And he's gonna tell you a little bit of like the work he's doing and how you can all benefit from that. There once was a leader named Sam whose tech helped reveal every sham. With videos might, he championed what's right and empowered the world with a cam.
Thank you, Moran and AI, for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I talk today about AI and deceptive AI and trust and truth, and some of the challenges we face at Witness, which is an organization I lead that helps grassroots activists, human rights defenders, and journalists defend the truth of war crimes, of human rights violations, of the seizure of their ancestral lands. And they fight a battle for the truth every day and have fought for years. And now layered on top of this, they have the challenge of AI. About 7 or 8 years ago, Witness started an initiative called Prepare, Don't Panic. And this came out of a lesson we'd learned during the social media era, which was if human rights groups didn't get ahead of problems and emerging technology, we were going to get left behind. The concerns of the people we cared about would come last, not first. And so we started talking to human rights defenders and journalists all around the world about what they wanted from this emerging area of deepfakes and synthetic media. And I love the term uncharted territories and also the complexities of it, because many of them said, we know what this is going to look like, because it's going to look like how all technologies have impacted us. It's going to look like how mis and disinformation already harms us. It's going to look like how we are surveilled and harassed by authorities already. So what we did in this initiative was try and build on the experience of the human rights defenders and journalists we worked with and their experience of what these uncharted territories would look like, and then translate that into advocacy and work and an agenda setting, both at the technical level and in policy, that would try and make sure their concerns were heard as we built this next generation of technology. So I want to talk a little bit about what's actually been happening, and it's great to follow Jacob and his discussion of kind of the boom bust of the idea that this was going to be an AI election year. I think it's been a very complex year in terms of how deceptive AI, and here I'm talking about the idea of deepfakes, the ability to manipulate with AI, images, video, audio, has played out. And so when we look at what's happened over the past year, and I say this based on both the research Witness does, as well as the fact that we work very closely with many communities who are grappling with this, there are explicit harms. Right, so non-consensual sexual images synthesized to target women and girls continue to grow in prevalence worldwide. There is real deception. In many elections where we've worked with journalists, you see something like this example from Pakistan. It's a man who's had the words substituted in his mouth, his lip sync dub, to make him say he's withdrawing from the election or you should vote for another party. And then we've seen communication in novel ways. So on the right, you're seeing how an AI voice clone was used to represent the politician Imran Khan from behind bars in Pakistan. And then there's this gray area that I think we're all experiencing in the US elections of what you might call soft fakes. This is a term from Ruman Chowdhury and Nigat Dad to describe the ways people create images using AI to humanize or aggrandize people they believe in, on the left. And then on the right, probably the most prevalent use of deepfakes in the political world is a satire. But satire is a complicated thing because satire can verge into gaslighting and deception, particularly when we're talking about photorealistic content. So a lot of what we're seeing worldwide is satirical videos that might not be so funny. They might not be just joking. And then this is the area where many of you have probably participated, which is creating AI for the kind of purposes we've always done communication. To express solidarity, like the person who created the All Eyes on Rafah graphic, to generate money, like the folks who create things like Shrimp Jesus and those impossible images of houses that you see in your relentless stream of slop on Facebook these days. And then for feels, and what I'm describing here is this is an image from Hurricane Helene from last week. That is not a real image, that's an AI image. And one of the commentators sharing it says, really, essentially, I don't care that it's not real, it's emblematic of my reality. And this is not new, right, that we create images and they don't literally represent what we believe. But AI has this incredible power to turn metaphor and idea into images and to enable us to represent what looks like reality, but in fact represents our point of view. Now, I want to add one more layer of complexity to what we're seeing with AI, which is something we see very acutely, and this is taking me back to what I'm framing here about how human rights defenders and journalists are experiencing this. So we run this rapid response mechanism. It's the only one globally where journalists and fact checkers on the front lines, when they encounter something they believe is a deepfake, can share it to a team of media forensics experts to say, help me work out if this is real or faked, or if someone is claiming it is faked when it's in fact real. And that is something that we see a lot of. It is examples like this. It's an Indian politician whose piece of audio was leaked. It turned out it was real. We ran all the forensics checks. It was real, but he said straight away when it came out, it's AI generated. Look, you've seen all the music out there that can be generated with AI. This is fake. Or it's the Ghanaian politician a couple of weeks ago. This is the vice presidential candidate in Ghana who video came out. He said something he probably shouldn't have said. It was a bit inflammatory. Straight away, he's like, it's made with AI. It would have been almost impossible to create this scene with AI. It was a rally. There were tons of people filming with cell phones. But he knew that saying AI instantly conjures up this idea of we can't trust what we believe and leans into the partisan belief of his supporters that, of course, he didn't say that. So in a sense, AI provides this kind of get out of jail card for when you say something and you want to dismiss something. And of course, we know that in the US as well, right? We're seeing, in some sense, the foundations being laid for election denialism now, right? For example, when former President Trump says that the image of a rally for Vice President Harris in a hangar was made with AI. Again, completely implausible, but believable to people who might want to believe that. Or similarly, the claim that the image on the right of Jean Carroll may have been made with AI, despite the fact it was taken many decades ago. So what can we do? I'm going to talk about a few things we can do and the problematics of those, and then I'm going to pose a few questions to you that we're really wrestling with here. So first, should we just listen and look harder? I'm going to make this simple. The answer is no. The answer is no because I'm probably an expert on deepfakes and AI, and I got fooled by the Pope in the puffer jacket about a year ago. I thought he was wearing an amazing puffer jacket, and then I was like, oh, I've been fooled by an AI image. And I think this is terrible advice because it encourages a kind of forensic skepticism where we just try and listen harder or look harder, and that's not how we solve the AI problem. It's going to get harder. You know, every week there's a new research paper that shows how poorly our eyes and ears actually detect deepfakes, both audio and video and image. Again, want to really discourage that, although it tends to be how journalists talk about it, this idea every week that we should just look harder, listen harder, look for the six-fingered hand, etc. Let me talk about detection. Again, I'm not going to give great news here, but I'm going to talk about how we might want to think about it. So detection of AI-generated images and video is hard, right? Here's an example, DC example. There was a fake image of the Pentagon on fire. When you put it through an AI detector, the original image on the left, it came back saying it's made with AI. When you cropped it, that's what I've done on the right, it says it's made by human. That is not reliable, right, if you think about how the internet works and what we do with images. The bigger problem, and this is the one we see in the training and the work we do globally, is that the tools to do detection are not built for the world. They're built for Americans, they're built for US accented English. They're not designed to work if you are using, trying to analyze something in Telugu. If you're a journalist in Ghana, you don't have access to the tools. So it's not only the tools technically don't work, but they're layered on top of the power of who gets access to resources and who is prioritized. And then I'll talk about one final area of solution that we work on, which is around media transparency and disclosure. This is the idea that when you look at a piece of video or photo or image, you should be able to kind of understand the recipe of how it was made, right? So sprinkle of AI, sprinkle of human, mixed together, churned out that way, served into a few serving bowls, right? Essentially that what we need here is transparency. And I like this idea. It's something that at Witness we've invested a lot of resources and capacity in, but only if we get it right, right? And I'll give you an analogy here built on the recipe analogy is, I want to know the recipe of how AI is used in what I consume, because I'm not going to be able to spot it with my eyes and ears. I want to be able to read, for example, a piece of metadata that tells me that. But I don't think I need to know who the cook is. And the reason for that is every time we explained this solution to people we worked with, they said, if you always attach the cook, the person who creates media, to the piece of media, that is going to be weaponized against dissidents, against citizen journalists, going to be weaponized against free speech. Final thing to say on this, none of this works well also unless there is a pipeline responsibility. What I mean by this is all the solutions I'm talking about here also depend on us fixing what we got wrong with social media, which is the responsibility here to do these things, to detect, to allow us to see the recipe, relies on placing the responsibility all the way from the people who built those AI models, to the way they were deployed, to the tools, and ultimately to how we experience them. So let me end with two questions, which are uncharted territories that we're grappling with at Witness as we look ahead. And they really relate to our core mandate to serve those human rights defenders and journalists who are on the front lines. So the first is, often people analogize this to a cybersecurity problem, right? And they're like, right, going forward, we're going to have to verify, then trust. We're going to trust nothing, right? And the moment I look at that, I say, when you trust nothing, that is not an equal footing. We trust some people less. Our societies are biased in terms of how we assess trust. They distrust certain communities more than others. So we have to be very careful. So how do we think about this in a way that makes sure that we don't increase the burden of proof on communities who already face that burden, right? So again, as we take an analogy, for example, of cybersecurity, how do we do that well? And the second, and this comes very much from what we've heard from human rights defenders, is how do we fortify the truth? What I mean by that is they say, I don't want to just spend my life debunking falsehoods. I want to have the integrity and credibility of, for example, the videos I shoot of a war crime in Gaza or Ukraine to be trusted and seen and validated. We've got to think about how to do that because it's not going to be enough just to take a photo or a video. We're going to have to think of new strategies. We have to think of new strategies that take advantage of the fact that we're using AI, to create floods of true information, to create true information that's resilient to being manipulated. So it's a challenge we're grappling with. I want to put that out to you here and open up our discussion. Thank you. Hi, Esther.
Thank you. That was great. I have two prompts I'd love to hear your reaction to. One, there are two ways to detect cancer using sort of external methods, and one is to look for the signature, a liquid biopsy, it's in the blood, and that's where you're looking for some identifying information or something. And then the other is a PET scan where you're essentially looking for the metabolism. Mm-hmm. Where does the nourishment go? And so looking at the business models of these places, looking at the flow of funds, which often is in the other direction from the flow of information. There's a lot of bad actors, and they are aided and abetted by people who just want to make money. They're not.
Yeah.
So that's one question. And then the second is, actually, I'm trying to remember the second. Go with the first. But it's something similar.
Yeah, the analogy is a powerful one. And actually what we've heard from folks we work with is they want to have responses that deal with symptoms because sometimes that really is important. So we spend a lot of time working to help people use detection because in a messy world of a whole range of actors, many of whom are going to act outside the system, they need to be able to deal with the symptoms, right? So you get a piece of AI, you've got to handle it. At the same time, what they say very concretely is, we know this is tied up with the existing systems of how social media and big tech works, right? So unless the incentives change, for example, the incentives are to create tools for synthesis on the research side, not detection. The incentives are to create AI tools that will lean often into existing business models, like advertising or algorithmic recommendation. So they see both sides of it. And I guess when we try and work on it, we try and work on both sides. I think that's the correct response, is to think about how do you deal with the systems, and then how do you deal with the symptoms, and how do you deal with the systems. Now, the important thing to say about it is, in order to do the symptoms response, like to do that, for example, that detection, it depends on changing the incentives at the systems level. for example, that incentive that at the moment, there's much more incentive to create hyper-realistic tools for creating potentially false information than there is to create safeguards or ways to detect that or to manage that.
Yeah, but it's also publishing it. It's not just creating it. It's the business models of the publishers who need to have some liability for not managing their supply chain.
Yes, absolutely. I think the one thing I'd say there, Esther, is I think one of the things in my space that's often been an issue is people talk about platform accountability, so they're looking at the publisher, but really when we're talking about AI, there is a supply chain accountability that's really conglomerate accountability. It's not Facebook, the platform, it's Meta, the conglomerate, that has accountability.
You said that you're looking into new ways to fortify the truth. Have you been, or you and your organization, been considering integrating other forms of emerging tech like Web3 as a way to create signatures around some of the images or videos that are created?
Yeah, and this is, it's interesting, like the sort of the story of how people started to think about kind of this question of showing the recipe in many ways began with human rights groups probably 15 years ago who were trying to prove the integrity of footage and often starting to explore both decentralized web solutions and blockchain-based solutions. I think they have a place. One of the things we've discovered is there is a part of this that's about, let me think about how to sort of describe this. Something like decentralized web is both a solution, but it's also doesn't quite work for all the challenges we have around it. So sometimes you're really trying to prove the existence of a single moment in time. But in fact, a lot of what we're seeing with the way we're trying to track the use of AI and imagery is actually how do you track evolution and the way it's shared and the way it's, and so then you start to create a sort of a very big pattern of how do we show evolution of media over time? And so far, the decentralized web hasn't been great from a resource perspective and others to sort of track a lot of information like that over time. I'm not sure I fully answered your question, but it's one of the things that we've really grappled with is how to tap into that while recognizing that it's not purely about like a single moment. A lot of the time, people come to me and they talk about solutions with blockchain or the decentralized web, and they're like, we're going to seal sort of a piece of media or a particular moment, when in fact we're talking about how media evolves and gets used in a whole diversity of settings. And as yet, the decentralized web isn't perfect for that versus the infrastructure we have now. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. This work is really fascinating and important, so appreciate it. I have a question kind of about, I guess, convergence and cross-pollination, because, a lot of the themes that you said were really resonating with me because I'm a climate person, where we've had a crisis of disinformation since like the 70s and 80s when oil companies tried to cast doubt on science about climate change and largely succeeded, and we have a very polluted information environment there. Similarly, when you were speaking about burden of proof, this is an environmental justice issue where communities that are burdened by pollution have to try and invest in measurement, they have to overcome these information gaps, et cetera. So I'm just kind of wondering how you look at those convergence moments between some of the work that you're doing and work that's happening in other spaces, and if there's opportunities to cross-pollinate there.
Absolutely, and what you're describing is exactly the previous knowledge that we're trying to tap into in this work, which is like, it's not novel to have that burden of proof. Now, is it escalating because of this technological? So in fact, in another area of Witness's work, we look a lot at how do you bridge the gap between the expectations of burden of proof and what is actually possible for communities. And I'm thinking about actually the research justice conversation yesterday as well, about, and the way this plays out is, there are these whiz-bang ways of demonstrating, for example, war crimes with visual spatial, visualizations, OSINT techniques, and those are way out of the reach of most local human rights groups. So as we keep setting that burden of proof higher, and as AI escalates it, we have to be really cautious and attentive to it. So a lot of our attempts is to actually lower, in some sense, the burden of proof towards where the expectations can be met. And I think just to go back to your previous question about sort of fortifying the truth, I think it's going to require a whole constellation of ways we change our tactics and our strategies as well as the technology. So just going back to the blockchain, I think technology is a part of it, but a lot of this is about learning tactics and strategies that are applicable at the level that communities work at. So I'll give a really concrete example that a lot of communities we work with, as they think about how to deal with the threat of AI generating something, they're thinking, how do I film this from multiple viewpoints, right? That's a very simple technical strategy that is possible with the prevalence of cell phones, and it's not or tactical strategy, excuse me, it's not a technical strategy. So again, remembering what is applicable and appropriate in different contexts. Yeah.
Hi there, thank you. I was wondering and thinking a little bit about Russell's teapot, where he made that claim where it's not the responsibility of the receiver to disprove some spurious information, but how might we look at setting that threshold on the producer of information and kind of leverage that? Thoughts on that?
I think there is, and maybe this takes us back to Esther's question earlier, that I think we can put more pressure on the producers of information, but for them to be able to produce information that we further down the line can assess and trust, you have to push responsibility further back up. So to give a good example, if I want to have a system where I can have that sort of media transparency, the recipe of what's in content, and frankly, for 99.9% of the time when I'm encountering AI content, I'm not bothered by it, right? Like, so the recipe is not an indication that something is malicious content or poisonous. It's just like a way of understanding, what's in the content we consume. If you're going to have that system, it only works if the responsibility is pushed all the way back, as I say, to the AI models, the tools, and then you or I as a producer of information, or let's think bigger picture, a platform as a distributor of information should be using those. We potentially should have liability if we don't use them in certain circumstances. And that makes it much easier for a consumer of information then to engage with that. So I absolutely agree. And it takes us back to why the listen and look harder is such cruel advice to people, because it's inherently a recipe for distrust and confusion. And it's not the responsibility of individuals to scrutinize everything at the level that we're starting to demand of them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So